6 times. The human called the ambush before our sensors saw anything. 6 times. There was no data. We opened an investigation into her for treason. We were wrong about what she was. I need to explain what that sentence means to a Corvani, because to your kind it may sound like praise, and to mine it was an accusation with a body count attached. The Combine does not guess. That is the first thing to understand about us, and the last thing I understood about her. Every decision a Corvani soldier makes is fed to them. A forward element does not advance until the probability of contact drops below a threshold the Grand Staff sets to 4 decimal places. We have run our wars this way for 600 years. In that time, our contact casualty rate has fallen by 91%. We are, by every measure any species keeps, the most survivable military in charted space. We survive because we do not feel our way through anything. We are told. There is no Corvani word for instinct. I have looked. Our language has 41 words for degrees of certainty, and not one for a certainty that arrives without a source. When a soldier acts on a thing they cannot cite, the incident report has exactly 2 boxes to check. One is labeled compromised. The other is labeled malfunctioning. A Corvani who moves without data is either taking orders from the enemy or broken. There is no third box. For 600 years we have not needed one. Then a human sergeant filled our logs with the third box, and I was the officer assigned to decide which of the first 2 she belonged in. Her name was Okonkwo. Ada Okonkwo, sergeant, attached to a mixed forward company on the Sember line, which is where the Combine puts humans, because humans are new to us, and the Sember line is where things are tested. I pulled her file the morning her 6th call came in. I expected the file of a spy. A spy has a shape. Contacts that don't resolve, movements that don't line up, a clearance level that keeps brushing against things above it. I know that shape the way you know a face. Her file did not have that shape. It had a worse one. Here is what did not add up, and want to lay it out the way I laid it out for myself that morning, because the not adding up is the whole of it. A sergeant on the Sember line has access to her company's local sensor feed and nothing above it. That is her ceiling. It is enforced in the hardware. From that ceiling, the probability model available to her had flagged the 6th position as clear, not marginal. Clear to 3 decimals, she called it anyway. She put her company flat against a rock wall and would not let them cross an open marshalling yard the model had cleared, and 11 minutes later an ISCAR element that our overhead had never resolved opened up across that yard from a fold in the ground our mapping said was empty. 0 of her people crossed. 0 of them died. That is a good outcome. I want to be clear that from the first line of her file, the outcome was always good. That is what made it unbearable. A malfunction produces bad outcomes. A malfunction gets people killed and shows up in the casualty column where we can point to it. Okonkwo's malfunction, if it was one, had a save rate. 6 for 6. No source we could find, no feed she could have read, no contact she could have taken an order from, and 6 companies of Corvani and human soldiers who were alive because a sergeant had refused a cleared crossing on the strength of nothing at all. A spy does not save your soldiers 6 times for free. A spy spends what she knows. And a machine that keeps producing the right answer from no inputs is not a machine we know how to build. I read her file 4 times that morning. I do not do that. I am counter-signal. My whole discipline is reading a thing once and correctly. I read her file 4 times because each time I finished it, the shape I needed was not there. And I could not make myself accept a report with an empty citation field and a perfect record in the same document. So I went to see her, not to arrest her, to look at her, which is a thing my training says is worthless and which I had run out of better ideas than. She was cleaning her kit when I came into the ready bay. She did not stand the way a Corvani stands for an intelligence officer, and I noted that and let it go. I told her who I was and what Division 1 was from, and I watched for the thing a guilty soldier does when counter-signal says its own name. She did the opposite of it. Her hands kept moving on the kit. You called 6 ambushes with no feed, I said. Explain how. She thought about it. Not the pause of someone building a lie, the pause of someone genuinely trying to answer a question they have never been able to answer. The yard was too quiet, she said. The feed showed it clear. I know. It was too clear. She set the kit down. I don't have a better word for you than that. Sir, one had come with 41 words for certainty, and she had handed me a wrongness she could not source in the flattest voice I had ever heard a soldier use, and everything in my training told me to check the second box and be done. I did not check it, and I have spent every day since trying to decide whether that was the best decision of my career or the beginning of the end of everything my kind believed about how you stay alive. Because 2 weeks after that morning, Command would pull Sergeant Okonkwo off the line to prove she was a spy. And the mission they ran without her, clean, cleared 4 decimals of safe, would walk into the exact yard she wasn't there to feel. The company that flagged her first was not fond of her, and that is where I have to start, because it changes what her calls cost. 3rd Platoon, Semberline, mixed unit, Corvani and human. The ratio the Combine runs on every forward element now. Enough of us to hold the doctrine, enough of them to fill the roles the doctrine has no answer for. The Corvani in that platoon did not want a human sergeant who overrode cleared feeds. You have to understand what an override is to us. When the model says clear and a soldier says no, that soldier is not being cautious. That soldier is telling 12 other soldiers that the thing keeping them alive is wrong, and to trust her instead of it. For 600 years, the answer to that has been simple. You do not. Trooper Kess said so out loud, which is the only reason it entered my record. Kess was Corvani, 2nd in the platoon's fire order, the kind of soldier the Combine builds without trying. Precise, unhappy, correct. He had filed 2 of the incident reports on Okonkwo himself, Both checked the second box, malfunctioning. He believed it the way I had wanted to believe it, cleanly, because the alternative had no box. The op that day was a structure clearance. An ISCAR signal relay had gone quiet in a district our overhead read as abandoned, and the model wanted it confirmed on foot. Probability of contact, 4 decimals. Low. The platoon moved in the order the model set. Okonkwo did not have the seniority to set the order. She had the seniority to stop it once, and everyone knew it. And Kess had decided the day was going to be the day he made her use that up on nothing. They reached the third building. The feed was clean. Kess moved for the entry the model had marked as the approach. Not that door, Okonkwo said. I have the audio. Her voice does not rise. It is the same voice she used cleaning her kit. That is the thing the transcripts never capture, and the thing that mattered most. A human contradicting the machine that keeps her platoon alive, and sounding like she is naming a color. The feed is clear, Kess said. I know, you always know. He did not move from the door. This is the part the report calls insubordination, and I call the truest thing that happened that week. You know the feed is clear the way I know it is clear. We are reading the same feed, Sergeant. Mine does not tell me to be afraid of a door. Yours does. One of us is broken, and the model agrees with me about which. I'm not asking you to be afraid, she said. I'm asking you to use the other door. Give me a reason that goes in a report. She could not. That is the whole of her, in one exchange, and I did not see it yet. She stood there with a platoon watching, and an angry Corvani in a doorway, demanding a citation she did not have, and she could not give him one, because the thing she was reading did not come with a citation. It came with too much quiet in a building that should have had the ordinary sounds of an empty structure settling, and a smell she could not have named to you, and something under both of those that fired in her before her own mind could tell her why. The reason is, I'm telling you, she said, flat. Use the other door. Kess used the marked door. He was second in the order, and he had decided, and a human sergeant's nothing was not going to move him. He put his hand on it, and the platoon's human medic, a corporal named Vess, not our Vess, a human, the names collide, and I have stopped fighting it. The human medic stepped sideways without being told, off the line of the door, the way the humans in that platoon had started doing whenever Okonkwo went still. Not because they understood it, because they had stopped needing to. The door was seated on a pressure trigger. Corvani sappers found the housing afterward, intact, and it is the reason I can write this at all. The trigger was set below the sensitivity our sweep gear is calibrated to read, because the ISCAR had learned exactly what our gear reads and had built the thing to live under it. Our feed said clear because our feed was telling the truth about everything it could see. The device had been made specifically to be a thing our feed could not see. Kess opened the door slowly. That is the only reason he has a face. The mechanism was old. The seat had swelled, the contact dragged instead of snapping, and in the half-second of drag, Okonkwo crossed the space between them and put her weight into him, and both of them were on the floor and left of the frame when it went. Nobody in 3rd Platoon crossed that threshold standing. Nobody died. The sappers recovered the trigger housing and logged it as physical evidence, and that housing is the first thing in this whole account that a Corvani could hold in his hand. Not a hunch, not a save rate, a machined object built by the enemy, built to defeat the exact sense our doctrine trusts, and to slip under the exact instrument our doctrine reads. Kess signed the evidence log himself. His hand is on it. The Corvani who had checked the malfunction box twice signed a piece of metal that proved the feed had been clean and wrong at the same time, and that a human had read the difference off nothing but a door that was quiet the wrong way. He did not thank her. He is not built for it. He did something I found stranger. He asked her, in the ready bay after, in the tone of a man asking a diagnostic to repeat itself, how far ahead she had known. I didn't know, she said. I just didn't like the door. He stood there with that answer, which is not an answer, which fit in none of his 41 words, and I watched a precise, unhappy Corvani soldier fail for the first time to check either box. That was the moment the thing stopped being one sergeant's file and started being a question about all of us. Because if the enemy was building objects specifically to hide under our sense of the world, then our sense of the world had a hole in it the shape of that door, and only the humans seemed to be able to see the hole. 2 days later, that housing crossed my desk with a flag on it I had not requested. Counter-signal had escalated the case over my head. Someone above me had read the same file I had, reached the opposite conclusion, and given it a name. They were no longer investigating a malfunction. They were building a case for treason, and they wanted me to close it. The order to build the treason case came from Prefect Sarvok, and I want to be fair to him, because it would be easy not to be, and because being unfair to Sarvok would let the rest of us off too lightly. He was not a fool. That is the uncomfortable part. Counter-signal directorate, 30 years in, a conviction record that ran cleaner than mine. He had read Okonkwo's file, and he had reached the only conclusion the doctrine permitted. A soldier who produces correct threat assessments from no available data is receiving that data from somewhere. If the somewhere is not our sensors, it is the enemy's. The save rate did not exonerate her in his reading. It damned her. 6 perfect calls meant a source of extraordinary quality, and a source of extraordinary quality inside a human attached to the Sember line meant the Iskar had reached further into the Combine than anyone above me was prepared to say out loud. "You are fond of her," Sarvok said, when I raised the housing. He did not say it as an accusation. He said it as a diagnosis. The way you note a soldier is favoring a leg. Proximity does this. You have interviewed her, you have watched her hands stay steady, and now your instrument is reading her kindly. This is why we test at a distance. So the finding is not befriended. The housing is enemy built, I said. It defeats our sweep gear by design. That is not a source feeding her. That is a hole in our feed. Or it is the cover story a good source would want us to find. He let that sit. Sarvok was good at letting things sit. A device that proves the feed can be wrong is exactly what you plant to explain how your asset always knows better than the feed. You have found the evidence she needed you to find. I would like you to find the rest. I could not answer him, because he was not wrong that the shape held. That is the trap of a good counter-signal mind. Every fact that clears her can be reread as a fact she arranged. The steady hands are training. The flat voice is discipline. The saved companies are the cost of running a source you protect. There is no piece of evidence a spy cannot survive, because a spy is defined. She was inside a room that could not talk to anyone. Every emission monitored, every band watched. If a source had tried to reach her, we would have seen the reaching, and we saw nothing across 40 trials, not one whisper of an inbound channel. The archived recordings of that room are the cleanest counter-signal capture I have ever reviewed. No contact, no source. On the espionage question, the tape closed the case in her favor 40 times over, and she picked the seeded route as dangerous 31 times out of 40. Sarvok read the results and got quieter than I had ever heard him. 31 of 40 is not a source. A source is right every time, cleanly, and 31 of 40 is not clean. But 31 of 40 is also not chance. Chance is 20. She was 9 over chance, with no channel, in a sealed room, reading threat profiles we had invented minutes earlier off a map with no live data on it at all. The tape proved she was not a spy. The score proved she was not guessing. We had run a test built to sort every soldier into one of two boxes, and she had come out of it in neither. And this time, the evidence was ours. Not a battlefield hunch we could dismiss as luck. 40 controlled trials, sealed, monitored, generated by our own hands, and a human hitting 9 above chance off nothing. I watched Sarvok understand it, which took longer than it took me, because he had more to lose in understanding it. A spy he could arrest. An arrest closes a file. What the tape gave him was worse than a spy. It was a soldier reading something real that our entire censor doctrine could not detect. In a room we had scrubbed of every input a Corvani could name, which meant the input existed, and we simply had no organ to receive it. 31, he said once. Then he did not say anything for a while. She's not compromised, I said. No. He looked at the sealed room tape running clean, proving her innocent of the only crime his doctrine had a name for. She is something we do not have a category for. That is worse, Vantar. A spy is a problem I can solve. A soldier who is right for reasons the Combine cannot measure is a problem that means the Combine cannot measure something. He closed the file. Find out what? Before someone above me decides the simpler solution is to stop having her. He meant it as an order. I have come to read it as the first time a Corvani in that whole affair admitted, out loud, that our certainty had a floor, and that a human had just walked below it. The forward hospital at Denvar Crossing was not supposed to be a test of anything. It was a casualty clearing station under intermittent fire. 3 days into an ISCAR push that the model had rated as containable, and that the ground called something else. I had attached myself to Okonkwo's company on a counter-signal pretext no one believed, and we were both at Denver when the inspection party arrived, because the Grand Staff had chosen that week to send Sub-Commander Ian Drask on a survey of forward medical doctrine, and a survey needs somewhere to survey. Drask outranked everyone at the crossing and had opinions that outran his rank. He was a data officer of the older school, the kind who had watched the casualty rate fall for 30 years and credited the model with every point of it, which is not wrong, and had concluded from being not wrong that the model was the only thing that ever kept anyone alive, which is. He had read Okonkwo's file on the transit in. He arrived looking for her the way a man looks for a rumor he intends to put down. "You're the one who overrides feeds," Drask said in the triage bay, loud enough to be a demonstration. An inspection is theater, and he knew his role. 6 times, I'm told. 7 now. Explain to a visiting officer how a sergeant reads a battlefield better than the instruments the Combine spent 600 years building. "I don't read it better," she said. "I read a different part of it." "There is no different part. There is the data and there is noise." He gestured at the bay, at the monitors, at the whole architecture of our certainty. "Everything real is measured. If it is not measured, it is not there. You are telling this station that you perceive things that are not there. On a good day, that is malfunction. In a war, it is worse." She did not argue with him. I have never once seen her argue. She looked past his shoulder at the northeast wall of the ward, held there a moment, and then she said, "The thing that made an inspection into evidence. Move the patients off that wall." The northeast wall was interior. The feed had it as the safest span in the building, backed by 2 more structures between it and any ISCAR line of fire. There was no measured reason. When the sergeant looks at a wall like that, we move. We stopped asking why about a month ago. That is a witness, not the accused defending herself, not a counter-signal officer with a befriended instrument. A third man, unprompted, testifying with his hands that a pattern existed and that the humans around her had already learned to trust it before any Corvani had agreed it was real. Drask had come to put down a rumor, and the rumor had a corroborating witness who outranked the rumor by being nobody at all. The ISCAR round came through the northeast wall 90 seconds later. It was not a line of fire shot. It was indirect. A heavy round arced over the 2 structures the feed had counted as cover. And cover against direct fire is not cover against a thing that comes down out of the sky. And the model had scored the wall safe against the threat it could see, while the enemy used the one it couldn't. The round took out a section of interior wall that, 90 seconds earlier, had 11 casualties racked against it. There were none there when it hit. Petrosian had moved the last cot maybe 40 seconds before. I watched Sub-Commander Drask stand in the dust of a wall his doctrine had rated safe. in a bay full of patients who were alive because a human had looked at a blank interior span and not liked it. And I watched a 30-year data officer try to fit what had just happened into the two boxes and find that it would not go. He did not concede. Men like Drask do not concede in the room. They concede in the report, weeks later, in language that lets them keep their spine. What he did in the room was quieter and told me more. He asked for her call time. The exact second she had said, "Move the patients," logged against the exact second of impact. 91 seconds. He wrote it down himself, and I understood, watching him write, that he was not recording a save. He was recording a lead time, the gap between when a human knew and when the Combine's instruments knew, measured for the first time by an officer who had come to prove the gap did not exist. He left Denver without saying anything to her. But his survey of forward medical doctrine, when it reached the Grand Staff, contained a line, "No sensor failure." The annex reached a desk at the Grand Staff that had spent 2 years quietly logging every place our feed had come up empty and a human had not. And the officer at that desk had begun to see a shape in it that had nothing to do with one sergeant and everything to do with what the enemy had learned to do in the spaces we couldn't see. The joint operation at Kessel Reach was the last time anyone treated Okonkwo as a single soldier's problem, and it took an outside species to force the question into the open, because we would never have asked it of ourselves. The Combine does not fight the Iskar alone at Kessel. We fight beside the Thren, an allied species older than us in the war and prouder of it. And pride between allies runs on data the same way trust between Corvani does. The Thren share sensor coverage with us on joint fronts. They share targeting. They do not share soldiers they cannot account for. And a human sergeant who overrode feeds was, to the Thren liaison, an accounting problem with a rank. Envoy analyst Koreth was that liaison, and Koreth had read the same annex the Grand Staff had, and had drawn the conclusion an ally draws, which is the least generous one available. If a Corvani forward element contained a soldier acting on information the shared feed did not carry, then either the Combine was concealing a source from its ally, or the Combine had a soldier the Combine could not itself explain. Koreth did not care which. Both were unacceptable at a shared front. An unexplained asset is a leak waiting to happen, and the Thren had not survived longer than us by tolerating leaks. "I have your sergeant's numbers," Koreth said. "We were in the joint operations shelter, Corvani and Thren staff. The shared feed running on the wall between us like a thing being worshipped. 7 confirmed precognitions of contact. Now 8. I have also pulled the model's numbers for the same engagements. The model predicted those contacts correctly 0 times. 0, Officer Vantar. So, I will ask the question your Combine has been too polite to ask its ally, plainly. Your probability model, the model my people have tied our own soldiers' lives to at this front, was wrong 8 times and a human was right 8 times, and you have not told us how. That is not an alliance. That is you running an intelligence source through my front and calling it a sergeant. It was the hardest challenge yet, because it was not prejudice. I expected Koreth to reject it. Instead, the envoy analyst did the thing that turned Kessel from an interrogation into a reckoning. Koreth called for the model's own failure logs, not our sensor data, the model's internal record of its own predictions against outcomes, the audit trail the Grand Staff keeps and never shares, and which the Joint Charter technically entitled an ally to demand. Koreth demanded it, and after an ugly hour on the comms with a Combine staff that did not want to hand its own ally the record of its own blindness, the logs came through. We read them on the shelter wall, together, Corvani and Thren. The model had not simply been wrong 8 times. The failure logs showed something the save count had hidden. Every one of the 8 failures shared a signature. The contacts the model missed had all originated from the same class of terrain feature, a specific kind of dead ground our mapping resolved as empty because our mapping was built to resolve it as empty. It was not random error. The model was not failing across the board. It was failing in exactly one place, over and over. The same blind spot dressed in 8 different landscapes, and the Iskar had put an ambush in that blind spot 8 times because they had learned that the blind spot was reliable. Koreth saw it the same moment I did. The Thren are not slow. The model's own data, unsealed under an ally's demand and meant to expose our source, had instead drawn a map of a hole the enemy already had the coordinates to. "This is not one sergeant," Koreth said, very quietly, in the tone of an analyst watching a bad number resolve into a worse pattern. "Your enemy is building attacks inside a gap your instruments are structurally unable to see, and the only thing in this coalition that perceives the gap is a species your Combine has been preparing to court-martial for perceiving it." Nobody answered. The shared feed ran on the wall between us, and for the first time since I had arrived at any front, no one in the shelter looked at it as if it could be trusted to tell the whole truth. That should have been the moment we protected her. It was the moment we did the opposite, because the arithmetic Koreth had forced into the light frightened the Grand Staff far more than any spy ever could. A spy is a hole in your security into terrain that matched the signature on every one of those 8 failure logs. I have gone back to the order that pulled her, more times than is good for me, looking for the malice in it, and the worst thing I can report is that there wasn't any. That is the part I cannot get past. Nobody who signed that order wanted anyone dead. Every officer in the chain believed they were doing the careful thing, the measured thing, the thing the doctrine had spent 600 years proving was how you keep soldiers alive. They pulled the one soldier who could see, and they did it out of the exact caution that had made them trustworthy. And that is how I learned that a doctrine can be honest and lethal at the same time. But I need to tell you what the order actually was underneath the language, because the language hid it, and I did not see it until it was too late to matter. We had, by then, worked out most of what Okonkwo was. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. We knew she was not a spy. The seal room had proven that 40 times. We knew she was not malfunctioning. The save rate had proven that 8 times. We knew from Kareth's forced logs that the thing she perceived was real, that it lived in a specific blind class of terrain, and that the enemy had mapped that blindness and was building attacks inside it. We had, in other words, established that Sergeant Okonkwo was a functioning sensor for a threat category the entire Combine was structurally unable to detect, and then we benched the sensor. That is the twist, and it is not a reveal of a hidden enemy or a buried past. It is smaller, and it is worse. The reveal is that we understood her well enough to know exactly what we were removing, and we removed her anyway, because understanding a thing and being able to file it are different acts, and the Combine can only act on what it can file. We could not put Reed's threat below the level of instruments in a box. So we put pending resolution of counter-signal case in a box instead, because that box existed, and we filed her into a category that was survivable for the institution and fatal for the low ground north of Kessel. The push went in the next morning. I was not there. I was 300 kilometers back, in a Grand Staff annex, arguing with a wall of officers who had already decided, and I want to be honest, that I did not argue well. I had the sealed room tape and the failure logs and 8 saves and a Thren analyst's warning, and the company went in on data alone. It walked the cleared route into the exact fold of ground the model swore was empty, and the ISCAR opened up from 3 sides of a position our overhead had never resolved. And for the first time in this whole account, I have to write the sentence I had managed to avoid 8 times. Soldiers crossed the yard standing. Some of them did not reach the other side. I want to be precise even here, because precision is the last thing I have left, and I owe it to the ones it happened to. It was not a massacre. The company fought well. Corvani soldiers are the most survivable in charted space, and they earned that title in the low ground, and most of them came back. But most is not all, and the gap between 6 for 6 and this is measured in the soldiers who did not come back, and every one of them is a soldier who would have felt wrong about that ground the way Okonkwo would have felt wrong about it, if the Combine had let a human stand where the hole was. The casualty report reached me in the annex. I read it once, correctly, the way my discipline trained me, and then I did the thing I had done with her file, the thing I do not do. I read it 4 times, not because the shape wasn't there, because it was. Kess was on the report. Trooper Kess, who had checked the malfunction box twice and then signed the housing with his own hand. He had been in that company. He came back, but 2 of the names above his did not, and one of them was the human orderly's brother, though I did not learn that until later, and I am not sure why I am telling you except that I have stopped being able to write these as numbers. Sergeant Okonkwo was in a holding barracks 300 kilometers away, benched, pending resolution. When the low ground took the company, she would have stopped at the tree line. I went to the Grand Staff wall the next morning with the casualty report in one hand and the 8 failure logs in the other, and I said the thing I should have found the words for a day too early. I said the model did not fail. I said the model told the truth about everything it could see, and the truth about everything it could see was not enough. And we had a soldier who could see the rest, and we had locked her in a barracks to keep our filing system clean. And this time, because there were bodies on the table instead of arithmetic, the wall of officers finally stopped asking me for a 4-decimal number. They asked me to prove it, not with tape from a sealed room, not with a friend's audit logs, with her. In front of the full board, they wanted to see the thing measured, the human sensor firing in real time with an instrument that could finally read it. Or they wanted the case closed for good. They gave me one chance to show them what she was before they decided what to do with her. And I realized walking out of that annex that I had no idea how you measure a thing your entire civilization had spent 600 years having no organ to detect. I knew one person who might. She had spent her career studying the wrong species for it, and she was about to spend a week studying the right one. The neurologist's name was Senna Vok, and she had spent 20 years measuring Corvani fear, which is the only reason she understood, faster than anyone else in the Combine, that she had never actually measured fear at all. Vok ran a research outpost 2 systems back from the front. The kind of quiet installation the Grand Staff funds and forgets, where the work is too slow to make anyone's career. Her specialty was the Corvani threat response, the neural cascade that fires in one of us when a sensor feed reports danger. She had mapped it to a precision that impressed even me. She could tell you to the millisecond how long it took a Corvani brain to move from data to fear. Data first, always data first. The feed reports the threat. The eyes read the report. The mind processes the report, and then, and only then, the body is afraid. Fear, for my kind, is a conclusion. It arrives at the end of a sentence. The instruments start for us. I brought her Okonkwo and 8 failure logs and a board of officers waiting to be shown or waiting to close the file. Vok read the case in an afternoon and told me I had brought her the wrong question. You want me to prove she is not lying, Vok said. That is a counter-signal question. I do not do counter-signal. I measure when a nervous system decides to be afraid. She looked at the sealed room results. The 31 of 40. You have been asking whether she has a source. I am going to ask when her fear fires. Those are different questions, officer, and I think you have been asking the small one. She wired Okonkwo the way she had wired 1,000 Corvani. Same instruments, same thresholds, calibrated across 2 decades to catch the exact moment my kind moves from data to dread. And then she began to run the human through threat scenarios. Not sealed puzzles, but recordings, environments, the ordinary sensory clutter of a battlefield, played to her under the wire. I sat in on the sessions. I have watched the traces more times than I have watched anything else in my life, and I am going to describe what they showed slowly, because this is the center of it, and it deserves the slowness. When you show a Corvani a threat, the trace tells a clean story left to right. First, the sensory bands light, the eyes taking in the scene. Then, a measurable beat later, the processing regions. Then, at the end, the threat response, the fear, the conclusion. Data, then reading, then dread. You can put a ruler on the gaps. I have. There is your source, Vok said. The night the pattern stopped being deniable. It is not the Iskar. It is a million years of a world that tried to kill her ancestors every day, until the ones who felt the threat before they saw it were the only ones left to have children. She was quiet a moment, looking at a trace that ran the wrong way. We evolved the fear out somewhere back in our safe, mapped, measured history. A Corvani who felt danger without data was a liability, and we bred the liability away, and we replaced it with sensors. She never got to. Her line never got safe enough to stop feeling it. Then she said the thing I have not been able to put down since, and it is the reason I am telling you any of this. We built machines to tell us when to be afraid, Vox said. She is the machine. She just calls it a feeling. I brought the traces to the board, not tape from a sealed room, not an ally's audit, a live measurement run past 100 times of the exact thing the doctrine had insisted for 600 years could not exist, the data that proved the thing the data could not see. And I made them watch it run backward, the fear before the seeing, the conclusion arriving before its own evidence, until every officer on that board had put a ruler on the gap themselves and read the same impossible number. Sarvok was there. He watched the trace fire in the wrong order 40 times. The man who had built the treason case, and at the end he did not defend it. He asked Vok one question, in the voice of someone who already knew the answer would take something from him. Every human I could ever test, Vok said. It is not a talent, it is a species. She is not the exception, Prefect. We are. The board went very still, because that was the reveal that mattered, larger than one sergeant, larger than 8 logs. It was not that Okonkwo was extraordinary. It was that she was ordinary, that the Combine had spent this whole affair investigating a single human for the crime of being a human, and that every human soldier at every front carried the same organ, firing the same warning into the same blind spot the enemy had learned to hide in. We had a sensor for the thing that was killing us. We had thousands of them. We had been attached to them for years, and we had been checking their reports into the box marked malfunction the entire time. The order that changed the doctrine did not come from the board, and it did not come loudly. And I have decided that is correct, because the loud version would have been about us, and the quiet version was finally about her. The board did not reinstate Sergeant Okonkwo so much as stop being able to explain why it had ever benched her. There is no ceremony for that. A file was reclassified. The word treason came off it, and no word went on in its place, because the Combine still did not have the word, and the absence of the word is the truest thing in her whole record. She went back to the line without an apology, because the Combine does not apologize to its instruments, and she did not appear to expect one, because she had never once in this entire account performed the part of a soldier who was owed something. She cleaned her kit. She went north. The war did not stop to notice, but things moved in the slow way, Large things move once the small thing at the center of them has finally been understood. The doctrine changed first at the edges, where doctrine always changes first, among the soldiers who had already changed it without permission. The humans who had learned to step off the line when Okonkwo went still. The Corvani who had watched a wall come down where the cots used to be. It spread from them upward, one forward element at a time, faster than any directive, because a soldier who has watched it work does not wait for the manual. By the time the manual caught up, the manual was describing a thing the front had been doing for a season. The line, "The Grand Staff finally entered into forward doctrine," was 6 words long. It is the shortest passage in a document that runs to thousands of pages, and Okonkwo went on being a sergeant, which is the part one understand least and think about most. She read her wrongness off her quiet walls, and her 2 clean yards. And now the Corvani beside her moved when she moved instead of demanding the citation she could never give. And the save count climbed past the numbers I once used to build a case against her. And she never once, in all of it, acted like a person who had been proven right. She had not been carrying an argument. She had only ever been carrying a feeling, the same one her ancestors carried out of a world that tried to kill them daily, and it had never occurred to her to be vindicated by it any more than you are vindicated by a heartbeat. I closed the counter-signal file myself. I am the officer who opened it. So I am the officer who signed it shut, and the signing took longer than anything else in my career, because I sat a long time over the box where the finding goes, the box with its 2 options, compromised or malfunctioning, and I understood that 600 years of my kind's certainty had built a form with no line on it for what she was. So I left the box empty. I have thought about that empty box every day since. We spent 600 years learning to measure the world so well that we forgot the world could still be there when the measuring stopped. She never learned that because her people never got the luxury of forgetting. I opened her file to find out which kind of broken she was. I closed it having found out which kind of broken we were. The difference between us was never her feeling. It was that we had a word for every certainty except the one that keeps you alive. And she had no words for it at all. And only one of us had ever needed them.